Hi, Jeremy Crow here. In a lot of my recent videos, I've been talking a lot about ancient mythology, the nature of the universe, and our place within it. And I've tended to describe this in a way that's a lot, you could say, Manichaean or dualistic. Just because of the myths that I've been using have kind of tended towards that direction. But I didn't want people to get too nihilistic, so I hope this video provides a bit of an antidote for that. So, just to kind of recap, I've been talking a lot about the Sumerian figures of Enki, who is a benefactor to humanity and was one of the original or oldest known light bearer archetypes, you could say. And he taught humans knowledge and treated us as if we were family. Whereas his brother, Enlil, was more of a kind of a tyrannical ruler in a sense and treated us more like cattle and didn't really care whether we lived or died in a sense, except for what we could do for him in terms of working and providing resources to him. So, to get a little bit deeper into the nature of reality, what I've been talking a lot about is the prison planet concept. Now, it's more than a planet, it's the universe, but it just sounds so much cooler if you say a prison planet. But this is a very Gnostic concept. I like to refer to the world of experience as the cube, and this is the universe in general. Now, there's a collective cube, and this encompasses everything, including the more subtle realms as well. And what we experience personally is the reflection of that cube, that external, not necessarily, I mean, we're part of it, we're in it, but the collective cube's reflection on our own microcosmic cube. So some people have described it like we have our own little bubble, and what we're experiencing is actually just the reflection of the universe on the surface of our own personal bubble. And I really like the way that that's described, although I do think of it more in terms of a cube rather than a bubble, but that's just a personal preference in terms of the way that I like to visualize it. The cube, I like to refer to it that way because that's very Saturnian, and it's a confinement in a sense, and it's a limitation. And if you know anything about the symbolism of Saturn, and this ties back to Enlil, the tyrant, the vampiric kind of tyrant that rules, and its limitations. We've been placed under limitations. And the idea is that, we experience this samsaric cycle of rebirth that when we die, we start to rise up out of it. That's also a metaphor to up, right? But we start to escape from the cube, but we end up getting drawn back into it. We get caught up into it, and we get drawn into another incarnation, into the denser parts of it, the fleshy parts of it, or the more apparently solid parts of it, or the physical universe in a sense. That dense part of the cube. And the more deeply enmeshed we are in that dense part of the cube, the more feeling of separation we experience, the more intense the energies we produce, and that is the resource that Enlil consumes. These energies that we produce, these intense energies from that feeling of separation. And so Enlil is a type of vampire in a sense. So, is that bad? It sounds bad, doesn't it? But what I like to think of is that you don't get a diamond without pressure. and we are carbon. We're made of the same thing that a diamond is made out of. But a diamond has been put under an immense amount of pressure for a very long period of time, and eventually it develops this crystalline structure, and it's very well ordered, and it's one of the hardest substances known to humankind. And I use that as an example as well, because in the Tibetan tradition, they also talk about producing the diamond body. Now, this is an immortal body in a sense. You could compare it to a Taoist immortal, or even an ascended master you could compare it to. It's a more permanent structure, a more permanent vehicle for your consciousness, for your essence, for yourself. And it can survive the death of the physical body. And so that is only possible if you experience those limitations, that pressure. And that, I think that's the main, that encapsulates all of the things that I wanted to say, really. That we have to experience this separation before we can recombine, in a sense. It's alchemy. It's alchemy. So essentially with alchemy, the concept is we're in this kind of impure state, you could say. And impure is just, it's not the best metaphor, but it's what we're working with. So we have this idea that we are in an impure state, and really what that means is we're in a limited state, that we don't have the structures, you could say, to fully manifest our potential. And so what we do is we need to break it down, and that is the death force. And you need that death force, and that's Saturn, the death force of Saturn. And even if you want to talk about Saturn a little bit more, we can talk about how it is a death force, and it is that limitation, but it's also a harvest. It's also that cycle of abundance, really, when you come down to it. Jupiter is Saturn's son, right? And Jupiter is the abundance. It's the next leader after Saturn, and he's still kind of a tyrant. It's Saturn's son, right? And if you look into it, that's Yahweh, because you have Enlil becomes El, and then you have El in the Hebrew Bible, and El's son, who becomes the tribal god of the Israelites, is Yahweh. And Yahweh is like Jupiter, and Saturn was like the father that was like El Elyon. And I have other videos that get into that, but it's one interesting thing to note is that I think it was just last night there was a very interesting alignment with Saturn, Jupiter, and the moon. Just a little piece of trivia. But it is kind of interesting we're talking about that. So just to get back to it, you have this death force, and that can break down the structure. It's like fermentation. So when you're making wine, so let's say you start with a bushel of grapes, and you break it down. First you break down the physical structures, and then you introduce the death force, which is, in alchemy we call it putrefaction. And so this ferments, and it breaks down the bonds even further between the different elements within it, and it brings it to a chaos of those components. And some people refer to this chaos as the Prima Materia, or the first matter, what everything ends up coming from. So you break it down back to that primal ooze, in a sense. And then what you do is you separate the components out from that chaos, and each of those components you individually purify. And once all of those different components have been purified in their own manner, each one requires a different method, then you recombine those purified components. And when they recombine, if you give them enough time to interact, they form such a harmonious like union, that they're working together in such a harmonious fashion that they fuse into a solid crystalline structure, you could say, like the diamond body. And in alchemical terms, this would be the Philosopher's Stone. Now, if you know anything about the Philosopher's Stone, it is incredibly difficult to break that down even further. Now, there is talk about how you can break it down further, and they call it projection, where you make it even more powerful and make it even more concentrated. But that's the further work, right? Let's concern ourselves with getting to the Philosopher's Stone first. So you need that Saturn force. You need the pressure. You need that pressure. And even just look at working out your body. If you want to make your body stronger, you need resistance. You need weight to give resistance to your muscle in order to break down the muscle. And then when it heals, it grows back stronger and more efficient. And so this is what you're going to do with your own soul. So there are different methods, and I have videos that talk about that as well, that get more in depth. One of the videos that I had recently talks about how you can use lucid dreaming to help facilitate that. And it's a very high level video, but it does get some of these concepts down. Now, if you want to dig into some of the more practical things, you can talk about soul retrieval, shamanic soul retrieval, and you can talk about the fragmented soul, that we have a fragmented soul, and that we want to unify the various different components. We want to forge a solid unit out of those components that we're starting with. And what you can do is you can revisit old traumas, especially childhood traumas, because back when we're a child, we experience a lot of things that we weren't capable of processing at the time. We didn't have the mental and emotional faculties to process them, and therefore it became a trauma. And that forms a complex within your soul, and there are workarounds that are developed just automatically, subconsciously, in order to avoid that. And we mostly grow up collecting traumas, collecting these complexes, and we have a more and more elaborate and complex and labyrinthine system of working around them, trying to work around all these different complexes, rather than untying the knot, taking a look and really kind of re-examining them with the mental and emotional faculties that we have developed as an adult. Now we can go back and we can process them. We can actually inject that adult perspective into the situation, almost like a form of time travel, where we can travel back in time to that event, revisit it, relive it, and add in the mental and emotional faculties, the processing that we have available to us now. And that can often lead to a cathartic release. And this is the beginning of the healing process. And oftentimes, once that cathartic release happens, then just over the course of the next couple weeks or the next few months, or sometimes even longer, but depending on how deep that trauma has been embedded. And you might need to revisit things more than once, but This is the beginning of healing. And as that is healing, as that knot gets untied, that releases so much energy. And we don't have to work around it anymore. And the various different parts start working a lot more in harmony with one another. And we can start to forge that unified, complete, harmonized self that won't break down when we experience that afterlife review, that purgatory, you could say, where that bardo, where we're experiencing like almost like all the different predilections, the various karmas that we have accumulated, developed. And I'm not talking about cause and effect. I'm talking more in terms of how we programmed ourselves to behave habitually in certain ways. So we become more free. We're not bound to act in a certain way in order to avoid the sore spots in our soul. We can act in a more free and spontaneous way in the moment. And that is the diamond body, really. That's the beginning of the diamond body. That's the gestation of that diamond body. And if we can birth a full harmonized, complete harmonized self, then that's when we are truly free and we can escape the cube, the collective cube, because we've turned our own personal cube into a diamond, a crystalline structure, a powerful vehicle for our self, for our consciousness. We become a force in our own right in the world, and we can even create our own worlds instead of just being subjected to the stimulus of the environment and reacting to it unconsciously or programmatically. So I hope that helps. I hope that helped resolve some of the dualisms that I've been talking a lot about lately, and that we can achieve a certain level of appreciation for that pressure, for those limitations of the cube, the Saturnian cube that we're kind of trapped into. It's necessary. It's almost like, you could think of it like a womb, in a sense. So what do you think? Do you enjoy the cube? You know, like maybe like Cypher from the Matrix, where he's like, I know the Matrix is telling me that the steak is juicy and delicious. But you see, he wanted to be ignorant. He wanted to forget. He wanted to just be in it and be stimulated by it, rather than understanding it and gaining a superposition where you can achieve a much greater level of freedom. So I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you've enjoyed my previous videos, and if you do, please share it, because YouTube has been really dinging me. My last video got demonetized. They've been deranking my video and not showing it to as many people. So if you know anybody that you think might like this video, please share it with them. And until next time, everybody, stay lucid.